Good morning. I'm Kotz. I'm one of the pastors here at Westlight. We are starting a new series called The Journey Begins because in 2026, we are going to go through the book of Matthew. It's like my thing. I want you to know that I have this thing where I feel like at least every 5 years, we need to talk about Jesus, right? I mean, we should be talking about Jesus all the time, but we should go through one of his biographies every 5 years. And the last time we did this was through the book of Luke. And it's been 5 years. So we are starting the book of Matthew, and this is going to take us probably over a year. I haven't really mapped everything out yet. I map out series at a time, and I'm guessing this will take us to the middle of 27, maybe at the end of 27. We'll see. Okay. So we're going to get started. In case those of you guys are like, I'm new to this Christianity thing, or I've never read the Bible, or I tell my friends I do, but I really don't, which I think is most of us. No, you guys read the Bible. The other Christians that I deal with, Okay, so I want to share with you a few things that you ought to know about the book of Matthew before we get into the first section of chapter 1. So this right here, next slide. This right here, I don't have a full document, so I just kind of cropped it at the bottom. This is an old document. It dates back to like the 200s to 300s. It was discovered in Egypt. This is actually one of the oldest fragments we have of the book of Matthew. And if you could read Greek letters, you could read right here. It says like Biblos, Genesios, which means the book of Genesis, but it's translated differently, right? You can see the name Abraham right here. It's really cool if you know how to read. That's just me getting really nerdy. So what is the book of Matthew? Well, let's talk about the author. Now, you might think the book of Matthew was written by... Yeah, good. You're awake for 2026. So author, Matthew, but the question mark is here because the book never claims that it was written by Matthew. It's just by tradition that we believe that it was written by Matthew. So we really don't know, but there are some traditions that we think are highly reliable that points us to the author being Matthew. So we're just going to assume that it's Matthew. When was this written? Well, the date of this composition is about between the 80s and 90s AD. 80s and 90s. Now, the reason we don't know is because there's a lot of clues that we look at, and some of the clues don't line up sometimes. Maybe it's been edited, it's been changed over time. But what we do know is that this was not originally written by Matthew. Wait a minute, I thought we said the author is Matthew. No. When it was first, the original person who told the stories of Jesus was probably Matthew, one of Jesus' disciples. And it was an oral tradition for about 30 to 40 years. And then somebody said, guys, we should write this down. It's like, oh, why didn't we think of that? And so the composition of this might have been in the 80s to 90s, but it was probably shared amongst other believers in the church for about 30 to 40 years before that, which might have been from Matthew. Now, the way that these authors write, or they tell the story, is they have all these memories of walking and eating and sleeping and hanging out and discussing with Jesus. Like, they're doing all that stuff, right? And Matthew's like, there's so many things to write down. I don't know which ones to write down. And then sometimes his disciple will come along and say, yeah, no, Matthew, that story is good, but you got this part of the details wrong. So, there's variations of the story. But over time, because when Matthew was telling these stories, and Jesus was a very public figure, the public would act as a corrective, and so all the details would get fine-tuned. And eventually they'll say like, okay, let's write this down. And so in those days, different communities had different versions of the Jesus story. For example, there's like these really scholarly terms, like we'll call this a Matthean community, and there's a Johannine people who listen to the stories of John. That's called the Johannine community. There's a Markan community. There's a Lucan community, right? And they all have different parts of the Jesus story that they talk about, because every one of those authors, they have a specific goal. Like, for example, for Matthew, his goal when he wrote this, there's 3 goals that scholars were able to identify, is that the first thing is that Jesus is king, right? It's like, I want to tell a story to everybody that Jesus is king. Whereas in the book of Luke doesn't seem to really care too much. I mean, he does care that he is king, but he wants to focus more on the human aspect of Jesus. Right, and he talks about more of so Matthew, he has a focus. He has like this goal. He wants to everybody. After you finish reading his book, you're like, okay, I think I understand who Jesus is. Jesus is king. he's not just the king of the Jews, which people said that Jesus was. Matthew's trying to tell everybody that Jesus is not just the king of the Jews or a certain group of ethnic groups, that he is the king of humanity, the king of kings, king of all. So that's one of the things that you're going to see when we go through the book of Matthew. The second thing that he focuses on is that Jesus is the new Moses. You see, Matthew is a Jewish person, and he grew up hearing all these stories about Moses, right? And the story of Moses points us to this understanding that there was a man that God selected, and he was the one that saved the entire nation. There's a whole nation that was enslaved. Moses came in and rescued them, and because of that, we have a future, we have a hope. And Matthew, if you read his writings, you'll discover that he really wants us to focus on the fact that Jesus is here not just to rescue a certain ethnic group, but he's here to rescue all of humanity in the same way that Moses did. So he's like the new and better Moses. And the third thing that Matthew wants us to know is, well, it says here that Jesus is God with us. What he means by that is this. When there is a group of people who said, we believe Jesus is who he claims to be, the first group of people who decided to follow him were a group of Jewish people. And these people are like saying, you can't go follow Jesus. We're Jews. We're not supposed to go over there. And these people will say, but Jesus is Jewish, and he reads the same books that you do. Like he's a Jewish scholar. Like, what do you mean that I have to leave my Judaism behind to be, like, what do you mean, right? And so what's going on here is the Jewish community said, if you're going to go follow Jesus, you're not a part of our group anymore. And so they felt alone. So Matthew, he wrote this book basically saying, guys, if people are calling you a compromiser of your faith because you're following Jesus, nuh-uh. As a matter of fact, Jesus is probably even more Jewish than you guys are. Well, how do you figure that? Well, when was the last time somebody fulfilled Jewish prophecy, right? So the book of Matthew has a lot more verses that quotes the Old Testament than any other book in the New Testament, okay? And because they feel isolated, because they were kind of pushed out, because they started following Jesus, one of the themes that Matthew overemphasizes here is that Jesus, like if you had to leave your family because you're following Jesus, you're not alone. As a matter of fact, if you follow Jesus, Jesus is with you every step of the way. Jesus is God with us. Okay, so those are the three main themes. And over the next 1.5 to 2 years, you're going to probably be like, oh, that's what this parable is about, or oh, that's what this verse is about. Oh, it's usually one of these three things. Okay, all right. Now the structure of the book of Matthew is really interesting. There's 28 chapters in the book of Matthew. Here's 28 chapters right here, and this is how it's broken down. There's the intro chapters. It's like, hey, have you met Jesus? That's chapter 1 through 3, and then there's 5 blocks of teachings. And that's important for a reason. I'll get to in a second, okay? And then at the end, there's a climax of the story. This is where Jesus dies and rises again on the third day, right? So it's like in this format right here. Now, the reason why it's important that we see that there's 5 blocks of teachings, it's like there's 5 things that happen, and at the end of each of those blocks, there's like a teaching. Is because when you think of 5 blocks of teachings, what do you think of? For those of you Bible nerds, you know what I'm talking about here? Yeah, the Pentateuch or the Torah, right? There's 5 books of the Old Testament. That's what traditionally Moses, the one that made the 5 books of the Old Testament, of the Pentateuch or the Torah. So this is another way that Matthew is pointing us to say, look, Jesus is the new Moses, right? So anyways, that's nerd talk. You don't have to know that. Today, we're going to be starting up here. Next slide. There we go. Right here. Chapters 1 through 3. Today, we're just going to look at the first part of chapter 1, which is known as the genealogy of Jesus. That's, by the way, the word genealogy in the Greek is the word Genesis. That's one. Okay. Oh, so now you guys are like, yeah, 2026, new year, and you came to church, and I hope you were like excited, like, hey, we're going to learn about the genealogy of Jesus. I will do you a favor. I will not go over every single name. I don't even know how to pronounce half the names on this list, okay? So, and as a matter of fact, if you look through the genealogy of Jesus, there's names in there that don't show up anywhere else in the Bible. It's like, where did scholars would say, we have no idea how Matthew got these names. Like, was there like a registry or some kind of thing that he went to? He's like, oh, I'll just put the, we don't know how he got half these names. But it's in there, and we're going to go over just a few of those names today. So, and hopefully there's something in there for you that you could go home today and, Be like, oh yeah, that's cool. Okay, so here we go. Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So this is how he starts. Like, in case you want to know about Jesus the Messiah, and the word Messiah means king. It's like, if you want to know about who this king of the world is, let me tell you. And he starts, and I'm going to show you what he says next. Now, you're like, I can't see that. That's the point, is that it's really long. That's the point I'm trying to make here. It's really long. And it's not an exhaustive list, by the way. If you were here for the Christmas service, you'll note that there's 14 names here, 14 names here, and 14 names here. There's, right? So 14 times 3, whatever that is. That's how many names are here. But if you actually do your work, your homework, you'll discover that in the actual genealogy, there's more than 14 names, 14 generations in each of these things. So what Matthew did was he saw the names and he said, I'm going to take this name out, take that name out. It's important that I condense it to 14 names. Next paragraph. I'm going to take this name out, that person out, that person out. I want to condense it to 14. So why did he do that? Well, number one is the number 14 is a very important number. And I'm not going to get into that because I talked about it in Christmas service. But the point I want to make here is this. Why did Matthew pull out certain names and why did he decide to leave certain names in? Right? If you had to pick 14 names out of a bucket of like 50 names, you have to be intentional. It's not just going to be like, okay, close my eyes, cross that name out. Oh, okay, well, he got crossed out. That's not how he did it. He looked at the names and he intentionally chose the names that he wanted to put in this genealogy. So let's look at a few of them, and I think you're going to start to see a pattern here. Okay, here we go. First name, Abraham. Some of you guys know Father Abraham. Abraham, you read about it in Sunday school. Maybe you read it on your own. You heard people talking about Father Abraham. He's one of the heroes of the faith. He's the founder of Judaism. He's the founder of Christianity, Islam. He is like the main guy. He's like really good. In the New Testament, they talk so highly of him. But if you actually read the story of Abraham, you'll know that he is not that cool of a guy, right? He's actually very selfish. I don't know if that's wrong for me to say, but he's actually kind of selfish. I'll give you an example. He and his wife Sarah, or at the time his name was Abram and Sarai, they go into Egypt because there's like a famine. And while he's there, the Pharaoh's like, hubba, hubba, look at your wife. Or, is this your wife? And he knows, okay, Abram knows that if she is my wife and he wants her, that means that he's going to kill me to get to her because you don't want to take somebody else's wife. But if she's widowed, then yay, right? So he's like, oh, that's not my wife. That is my sister. Yeah, that's my sister. And so Pharaoh's like, so I could take her? It's like, yeah. At the expense of his wife. Like, he tries to save his own skin at the expense of his wife. But not only that, just a few verses before, in the same chapter, chapter 12, just a few verses before that, we learn that God gives Abram a promise, and the promise is this: I'm going to bless those who bless you, and those who mess with you, I'm going to mess with them, right? Like, I got your back. If they curse you, I'm going to curse them. So Abram knew that by Pharaoh taking his wife, that he is bringing a curse upon all of Egypt. And when I mean all Egypt, I mean like men, women, children, babies, senior citizens, animals, right? He's like, in order to save my own skin, I'm willing to bring a curse upon the entire nation of Egypt and let Pharaoh have his way with my wife. And you're like, Abraham, that is so messed up. Why would you do that? After all, God just promised you that he's going to take care of you. Like, what are you doing? And it turns out, if you read a little further in the story, Abraham makes some money off of this too. And then if you read on, you think he learned his lesson, right? Because he kind of learns his lesson there. No, he didn't. Because he does it again with a different nation, under a different king. He does it again. This is my sister. He does it again. Why? Because he wants to protect himself. So Abraham, yes, he's a great guy. He's accomplished a lot. And as a matter of fact, by the end of his life, he is known as one of the heroes of the faith. He is faithful. He's great. But he is filled with flaws. Another name on that genealogy is Jacob. Yaakov. Okay, Jacob. You'll find his name in verse 2. The name Yaakov in the Hebrew means heel grabber. Yeah, heel grabber. Heel grabber is an idiom meaning deceiver. I know. So if you want to name your kids Jake, you would think twice because, like, yeah. Okay, and because his whole life is filled with deception, and he doesn't just deceive anybody. If you look at the list of people he deceives, they're all family members. He starts off by first deceiving his own twin brother. And it's so that he could get the upper hand. And he doesn't just deceive him, it's like, ha ha ha, I got you. It's like, I'm going to deceive you, and I'm going to take away from you the most important thing to you, your birthright. And then after that, he teams up with his mom, and he deceives his own father who thinks he's dying. He's like, I can't see, I'm blind, I think this is my last breath. He's like, mwahaha, let me deceive you. Like, well, who does that, right? And then after he takes what he wants from his father, he takes off and he goes to live with his uncle. And what does he do? He deceives his uncle. And then he finds a wife down there, and him and his wife together deceives his father-in-law. And somewhere along the journey, he also tries to deceive God. So why would Matthew include this name in the genealogy of Jesus? I mean, if I want to give a story about how Jesus is the King of Kings and he's the Messiah, and he's this great character, I would be like, yeah, I'll just sweep that name under the rug, and I want to make sure that no one knows about it. No, but he's like, no, let me put that in there. Another name, Judah, Yehuda, Judah. He is also somebody, when we first meet him, he's a really bad family member. You know what he does? He's like, hey, let's kill our brother, our youngest brother. His name is Joseph. Let's kill him. And if it wasn't for another brother who's like, let's not do that. Let's instead sell him into slavery. I mean, that's not any better, but right? Right. The next time we see him, he's looking. Okay, so his wife passes away, and so you know what he does? He's like, I'm gonna go far from home and find a prostitute. And after he has his little business there, he basically is like, I'm going to pay you so that this never happened. Okay, but he's not that smart either, because he's like, I'm going to pay you with, oh gosh, I forgot my wallet. So here, I'm going to give you something that's really special to me, and this will be collateral until I actually pay you. Now, that person was actually his daughter-in-law that he didn't know, right? And later on, she's like pregnant, right? And it's like, hey, I have your child. And he's like, that's not my child. And she's like, remember this that you gave me? He's like, oh, no, right? He's not that smart. Anyways, he makes promises and he breaks them. Like, he's not that bright. He's not, okay, but why would Matthew include this guy's name in the genealogy of Jesus? We'll skip a few names on the genealogy. We'll go to the next guy. His name is King David. He's famous. He's very famous. He's found in verse 6 of that genealogy. He's a murderer. Yeah, he's a great king. He's probably the best king that Israel has had, but he's a murderer. The story goes like this. There's a lady, her name is Bathsheba, and she's going through some kind of a cleansing ritual. That means she's following the laws of God. She's trying to do the thing that God told her to do. King David, when he's supposed to be out there with his soldiers, he decides to stay home. He goes out onto his balcony, looks down, and he's like, hubba, hubba, right? So he's like, okay, you know what, servant, come over here. You see that girl right there? I want you to go over there and bring her to me. And he uses his authority to take advantage of her, and she can't disobey, right? And so after that happens, she gets pregnant, and he's like, what should I do? What should I do? Oh, I know. This wouldn't be bad if she was single, but she's not. She's married. She's happily married to a guy named Uriah. So what we're going to do is we're going to do everything we can to kill Uriah. And he kills him and takes Bathsheba as his wife. David, the mighty, great king, also has a dark side. Why would that name be in this genealogy? He's trying to cover up his own mistakes by murdering somebody. That doesn't make things any better. Later on, he has a son. His name is Solomon. He's also makes on the list of the genealogy. Solomon. I always like to say when we talk about Solomon, his name in Hebrew is Shlomo. I like that name, Shlomo. Anyways, you'll find his name in verse 6 of the genealogy. This man right here is power hungry. I don't know if you know this, but King Solomon had 700 wives, 300 concubines, and it's not because he's a womanizer. It's because he learned early on that if he were to marry strategically, He could build alliances. He wanted to have all the power and all the influence. So he'd marry local leaders' daughters, and then even enemy kings' daughters, so that he could consolidate all the power to himself. And he has 1,000 women in his life. And it's weird because he's known as the wisest person that ever lived. If you don't know, Solomon, when he asked God, like, can I have one thing? He's like, what do you want? It's like, I want wisdom. God's like, great. You could be wise and you could be rich. It just shows that just because you're wise, your appetite for power can undo all of that. Appetite for power is very, very dangerous. Okay, then after Solomon died, or Shlomo died, we have his son, Rehoboam. He made the list. Rehoboam, he was the kind of guy that was like, you know what, now I'm the new king. My dad was okay king, but I want to be a great king. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to have everybody respect me. And the way that I'm going to have people respect me is by being like really tough on them. And even his advisors are like, no, don't do that. It's like, nope, I'm going to be tough. And because of that, people were like, we don't want to be a part of your nation anymore. And he caused division in the nation and then never recovered from that. As a matter of fact, he's the one that caused the first civil war in the nation that God gave them. So Rehoboam made the cut. Matthew, why? Why would you put his name in there? And the next guy, Jehoram, you'll find him in verse 8. He is this king that's super insecure. He became king, and then when he became king, he noticed that he had 6 other brothers. I mean, he knew that before he became king, but he's like, I have 6 brothers. They all want to be king. I'm so insecure. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to murder all 6 of my brothers, so there's no threat to my throne. He made the cut. And last and the least, because I don't like this guy even more. His name is Manasseh. Manasseh, his dad was pretty cool. Okay, he did a lot of good things in Israel. Manasseh, his son, is like, let me undo everything my dad did and go an extra step beyond that. This guy's pure evil, guys. He was like, I want to build all these altars for other gods, right? And the book of 2 Kings doesn't give us a reason, but you can use your imagination on this one. So in one of the altars, he realized that he has to sacrifice something with fire on this altar. So he's like, oh, I know. And he brings his own son and puts him on the altar and burns him to death. He made the cut. This is in Jesus' genealogy, in Jesus' family tree. Like in elementary school or middle school, you have to do your own family tree. And you have to write your relationship to that person, right? I mean, imagine Jesus having that assignment. He's like, well, I have Manasseh who burned his own son. Yeah, so that's that. And I have this guy who killed his 6 brothers. And I have this. Like, I don't know if Jesus will ever get a bad grade, but he might get a bad grade on that assignment, right? So let's look at this list again, this whole thing. I just highlighted some names, and they all have these flaws. They all have these things where you would rather not talk about, but Matthew puts them on display and says, yes, Jesus' family tree is filled with bad actors. Even the people you consider to be heroes, they have a dark side. He highlights the good and the bad, and when it's bad, it's really bad, right? So in Jesus' family tree is littered with flaws, mistakes, and regrets. So the question is, why would Matthew do this? Well, let's go on. Look at the paragraphs again. The middle paragraph is a very interesting one, okay? Because in the first paragraph, if you read the names, you're like, oh, I know these Bible stories. It's like this idea of like this small family, Abraham's family, and through a lot of mistakes, but also some right decisions, they're working their way up. In business, you would say it's to the up and right, if there's a graph, right? It's up. It's like we're getting bigger. We are becoming a nation. We have a homeland now. This is cool. God is so faithful to us. Cool. And then the second paragraph right here is down to the right. We're doing everything wrong. And eventually, when you get to the end, this is verse 11 right here. This is what verse 11 says. And Josiah, the father of Jeconiah, and his brothers at the exile to Babylon. At the end of the second paragraph, God gave them this land, and they grew into a nation. At the end of the second paragraph, he's like, you made so many bad decisions that now you're taken out of that land and now you're living in a foreign place, in enemy territory. And you're like, well, everybody makes mistakes. In that second paragraph, God sent prophet after prophet, warning sign after warning sign, and every single one of them were like, nope, we don't care. Nope, I didn't, I didn't hear you. And every prophet that God sends, he's like, guys, if you keep this up, you're going to destroy yourselves. It's like, nope, not going to happen. And it happens. It's a judgment. It's a whole set of generations of poor judgment. So Jesus' family tree is littered with generations of poor judgment, making bad decision after bad decision, and it's not because they didn't know. Remember, they were warned over and over and over again, right? So why would Matthew choose to dedicate a whole paragraph in there about Jesus' ancestors that made bad decisions after bad decisions? Well, let's look at the whole thing again, right? Like, there's so many things in this that you wish you could just scratch off. I wonder if Jesus is like, Matt, what are you doing? Just don't put that part in, right? What are you writing down? Don't. But remember how the composition of this works? It was an oral tradition first. People were sharing these stories, and they're like, this part is worth committing to memory, eventually writing down, because it's so important. So what's so important about this? I want to highlight 4 more names. Next slide. There's 4 names here that is really interesting. In case you can't see these 4 names, I'll show them to you in the next slide here. What do these 4 names have in common? Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. What do they have in common? Yes, the first thing is this. They're all women, okay? This is strange because in Jewish genealogies, you don't put in women. You just don't do that. That's not part of their culture. But Matthew says, oh, no, I need to put in 4 women. Why? Is there a statement? Maybe what he's trying to say here is that in the kingdom of God, women are just as important as men. Maybe that's what he's trying to say. But why these 4? I mean, he could have just easily used like the big women of the faith, like the matriarchs, like Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, Rachel. He could have used those 4 names because that's part of Jesus' genealogy. But why did he use these 4 names? Because what did they also have in common? Well, they all have questionable Jewish backgrounds. Like if you want to tell a story about a king and he's a king of the Jews, you want to show everybody that he's like pure blood, right? But in this, he's like, oh, let me tell you about Tamar and Rahab. They're both Canaanites. Canaanites? Who are Canaanites? Canaanites are basically the pesky neighbor that's always attacking Israel. That's them. And Matthew's like, I want to make sure you know that these enemies are also part of Jesus' bloodline. And flowing through his veins is the blood of foreigners. Ruth. You know who Ruth is? Ruth is a Moabite. You know what a Moabite is? Yeah, they're somewhere connected. Like if you guys know the story of Lot? Lot lives in a place called Sodom and Gomorrah, or he lives in Gomorrah. And then the spiritual beings show up and is like, you got to get out of here, you and your family, because we're about to rain fire upon this place. So he escapes. His wife turns to a pillar of salt. And so it's him and his 2 daughters. Okay, this part's going to get a little PG-13, maybe rated R. Okay, and as they go into a cave, they're convinced that the whole world is now burnt down, which is not true. It's just that one little section, but that was their world, so they thought the daughters are like, it's on us now to repopulate the earth. We need a man. Dad? The 2 daughters get their dad drunk, and they have babies. Actually, the name Moab, so the first son that's born, his name is Moab. You know what Moab means in Hebrew? It means, my father is my child, I think. Ab means Abba, yeah. So it's like, it's weird, right? Like, I'm going to name my son exactly how you're conceived. That's like so weird. But Ruth is a descendant of that guy, of incestual relationships, right? And it's like, why would you put her name in the genealogy of Jesus? Bathsheba, she's a Hittite, not a Jew. Like, it's like so weird. Like, why would you do that? Right? So women, questionable Jewish background. Thirdly, all 4 of them are either unmarried or widowed in the story that they show up in. Tamar. She marries this boy. He dies. So he marries his brother. She marries his brother, which was a custom back then, and he dies. So she was widowed twice. Rahab. Rahab, when we first meet her, she lives in a place called Jericho. She's unmarried. Ruth, well, she was married, and her husband dies, so she was widowed. Bathsheba, well, she was happily married until King David killed her husband, so she was also widowed. So why would Matthew, in a Jewish culture, if you're a woman, in ancient Jewish culture, I have to be more specific. In ancient Jewish culture, the way that we saw God's blessing on your life, on display, was if you were married. Because in those days, if you were a woman, had very little rights, and so you had to be married in order for you to be considered to be blessed by God. And why would Matthew list 4 women that were either unmarried or widowed? Why? Right? And then finally, the fourth thing that they all have in common is that they were all entangled in some kind of a sexual controversy. Okay, it's like, for example, Tamar, her father-in-law is Judah. Remember we just talked about Judah, flawed person, right? He was like, I need to get out of town. He finds a prostitute. Tamar's like, I'm going to dress up as a prostitute, right? Why would she do that, right? Or Rahab. Rahab, she was, when they found her in Jericho, she was a prostitute in Jericho. Ruth, okay, this one is like really scary and weird. Not scary, it's just weird. For those of you who read the book of Ruth and you're like, Ruth is my hero, there's some Jewish idioms in her story that suggests, if you're an ancient Jew, you'll be like, it's plain as day, it's like right there. But for us, you might not be able to pick it up right away. But basically, after she lost her husband and her mother-in-law also lost her husband, they're like, we got to make this work somehow. What are we going to do? And Ruth is like, well, I just met this guy named Boaz. It's like, oh, yeah, he could take care of us. Like, oh, well, then you got to do everything you can to like get that ring on, man, because you got to do whatever you can. And so some of the things that she does for Boaz are quite weird, okay? And you can't tell if you just read it in English, but anyways, we'll leave it at that. Okay, Bathsheba. The king took advantage of her, and basically, I would probably call this a rape, right? So this is like, why would you pick these 4? Or the question is, why would Matthew put these names in here? He could have picked any 14 names in each paragraph, but he chooses these. He picks people who are selfish, deceivers, womanizers, murderers, people who are power hungry, people who divide nations, people who are insecure, child sacrificers. Like, why would God choose these people to be a part of Jesus' genealogy? Why? Why would Matthew put these names in there? Now, N.T. Wright, he has a kind of a simple, funny comment about this. This is what he says. Matthew reminds us of the strange ways, to say the least, strange ways God worked in these families. If God can work through these bizarre ways, watch what he's going to do now. And he's talking about the rest of the book of Matthew. What he means to say here is this: God employs individuals with flawed characteristics to bring about goodness in the world. Our God is a God of redemption. Matthew starts his genealogy by saying, look at all the weirdos that's part of Jesus' family. God still used them. God used flawed people for his perfect plan. Now, this is important to us because at the new year, you're probably thinking like, 25 was a bad year for me. It's time that I turn a new leaf. It's time that I make better decisions. And so you pray like, God, can you help me? I want to make better decisions in 26. And then you don't hear anything. And you're like, oh, of course, God would turn his back on me. I'm a flawed human being. According to Matthew's genealogy, what you learn is you don't need to be perfect in order to be a part of God's plan. You're never too far from God, even if you messed up, even if you have generations and generations of flawed decisions. It's never too late for God to use you. Jesus' messy family history did not define him. This is also an important thing. A lot of us come from histories of like maybe our grandparents or maybe like generations ago. They've made some pretty bad decisions and now you're experiencing the brunt of it. If my parents didn't make those bad decisions, I would have a better life right now, right? Or if this didn't happen in my history, then we would probably be at a better place right now. Or you might be thinking, because there's alcoholism in my history, I'm bound to end up in the same place as they did. Jesus' messy family history teaches us that our past does not have to define us. Maybe in your history, there's a history, in your family history, there's evidence of poor judgment, maybe financial decisions that has ruined your family. Or maybe abandonment. So-and-so left grandma, so-and-so left my mom, and it's going to happen to me too. Maybe some of you guys are like, I have a history of abuse in my family, and I'm afraid that I might repeat the same thing. Or maybe insecurities. We have a history of insecurities, instabilities. We have a history of addiction. That doesn't have to be your story. That doesn't have to be the way you live your life. This genealogy in God's eyes, it proves that you are not the failures of your past. As a matter of fact, Paul the apostle, he makes a similar claim in the book of Philippians. This is what he says. He says this, brothers and sisters, he's writing to a church, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it. And it is this. He knows that God has this image of like, Paul, this is the person you're meant to be, but you are not that right now. But I'm moving and inching closer to the person that God meant for me to be. He says, I'm not claiming that I'm there yet. I'm work in progress, right? But one thing I do is like, there's one thing I do know for sure. This is what he says, forgetting what is behind. Now, he's not saying don't take responsibility for your mistakes, okay? You have to do that, okay? But he says, don't let your past hold you back. And in context, this is verse 13 of chapter 3. In the verses before, he talks about the good and the bad things of his past. He's like I was circumcised on the 8th day like any good Jewish person. I have good parents, right? But he also says, but I also murdered a bunch of Christians. It's like forgetting what is behind, right? And straining towards what is ahead. That's the person that God called us to be, right? He says, so if you find yourself stuck, you need to let go of the good and the bad of your past so you can cling on to Jesus and move towards the person you're meant to be. He says, so I want you to move ahead and I press on towards the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. And the word heavenward here doesn't mean like, ooh, somewhere in the sky. He's talking about how there is this ideal, an ideal version of you that God wants you to become. And there's an ideal community and an ideal world that God is creating. And you get to be a part of contributing to that. And he says, if you let go of your past and start focusing on what's ahead of you, you could start inching your way towards the goal that God has set for you. Some of us hold on to our past, the good and the bad. And Paul says you need to let go of that. So in summary, I just want to put it this way. A lot of us, our past hold us back, right? But here's the thing. You had no choice in the heritage that you inherited, the one that you received. You didn't get to choose what family you were born into. You didn't get to choose what ethnicity you were going to be. You didn't get to choose the school you went to, okay, when you were a kid, right? You didn't get to choose. You didn't get to choose the family history that you have. But the legacy you leave, well, that is your choice. Jesus wasn't held back. He embraced his history, right? He's like, yes, I am a Jew. I am all these things, but I choose to use my life in a way that could bless the world. I didn't grow up in a religious family, but I chose for myself. The legacy I want to leave behind is that of following Jesus. I want to leave a legacy of that the world I found myself in when I was born, I want to leave it better than it was. I want to contribute to the good of this world. I want to make the world a little more beautiful. I want to make the world a little more loving. I want to make the world a little more unified. I can't fix all the problems of the world, but I want to do what I can. I get to create. I got to choose to create a little more heaven on earth. So Jesus came from a line of heroes, but also he came from a line of flawed people. And he chose to bring heaven on earth by paying for it with his life. So that's Jesus' genealogy. And the question that I believe God is asking all of us today, and maybe for 2026, is this: what role will you play in your genealogy? Remember, what you consider the present will one day become history. And one day it will become family history. And one day it will be a part of a genealogy. A few generations from now, they're gonna have that same assignment. They're gonna be drawing the family tree. It's like, oh, there's grandma or there's grandpa. You know what he did? Everything before him or her, things were falling apart, made bad decision after bad decision. They were trapped in this addiction. They were trapped. They couldn't get out of it, but grandma and grandpa changed that. And because of that, we are a little more free and we are more the person or the family that God called us to be. So what role will you play in your genealogy? Jesus wants you to become the person that you're meant to be. And Jesus wants you to become a participant in creating the world that it was meant to be. So what role are you going to play? Amen?